Christmas 1992. A 14-year-old girl kisses her family goodbye, steps into the mist in her purple anorak, and vanishes. Johanna Young was heading out to meet a friend. She never came home. Her trainers were found neatly placed on a lonely lane, her body dragged through brambles, dumped face down in an icy pit at the edge of a lover's lane. Her jeans were missing, her skull cracked. She drowned while the village slept. Over 3 decades later, the killer or killers still walk free among the people who knew her best. Watton knows who did it, but why won't they talk? This is the unsolved murder that haunts a small village forever.